Madam Chair, just a couple of quick observations. And the relationship between railroads in the state of South Dakota through the years has been what I would characterize as an uneven one. You know, there are, throughout our state's history, examples of the state having to become involved. And I, in my job, my current job, had a previous job as a state rail director for the state of South Dakota, at times had to go on the warpath against the railroads when it came to service issues, when it came to rate issues. But that relationship is a symbiotic one. We have to have railroads in South Dakota. We're an agricultural state. We ship tons and tons and tons of agricultural products by rail. In the late 1970s, the cost of regulation put the railroads out of business. And so when some of the railroads went bankrupt, they abandoned thousands of miles of railroad in the state of South Dakota. And the state of South Dakota, knowing that it didn't have any options, levied a tax on the people of South Dakota to buy the railroads. And so South Dakota went into the railroad business, and we were in that business for about 20 years. And so as eventually we were able to get that turned back over to the private sector, but we learned a lot of lessons about, obviously, what the cost of regulation can do to the cost of moving a bushel of wheat to its ultimate destination. And so, you know, I approach these issues with a lot of caution, clearly with an eye on safety, which is what this legislation is about. And I think it's crucial that Norfolk Southern be held accountable and that we make what I think are pragmatic reforms that are responsive to what we've learned about the factors contributing to the East Palestine derailment. Potential requirements for defect detectors and updates to emergency response procedures are worthwhile, and I support the inclusion of those provisions in the bill. Otherwise, there's not much in the proposed legislation that would address the root cause of the derailment in East Palestine based on what we know so far. The bill imposes a 2-crew mandate. As was already been mentioned, there are 3 crew members on the train that derailed in East Palestine. The bill devotes new regulatory authority and research to long trains and block crossings. Neither of these factors were remotely related to the derailment. The bill imposes several new pre-departure periodic and locomotive inspection requirements. Some changes to pre-departure inspections should be considered since there's a possibility it was relevant to the underlying cause of the derailment. But the expansion of other unrelated inspections will just impose new requirements without any proven safety benefit. This bill should have been about safety reforms relevant to the derailment in East Palestine. But now it's been expanded to a stalking horse for onerous regulatory mandates and union giveaways. If the intent was to punish the railroads for their mistakes, this bill misses the mark. Instead, this bill will disproportionately affect the small shippers and their customers that I referred to earlier. My amendment strikes the provision in the bill that has an authorization, an unlimited authorization, to basically provide funding to commuter railroads, passenger railroads, and what I would simply say about that is the commuter railroads in this country share a lot of track with freight railroads. Why would they need a new grant program to comply? And if we need any evidence of the potential to raise costs across the network, the insertion of this program is a perfect example. The affected track, subject to the bill's requirements and shared with commuter railroads, makes up a tiny fraction of the overall network. If commuter railroads need funding over the next 5 years for their small share, imagine how much this is going to cost the rail network broadly. So I find this provision, both the basis and the structure, unacceptable, which is why I submitted an amendment with Senator Cruz to strike the program. This new funding would be on top of the tens of billions of dollars that commuter railroads have received in the IIJA. How much more could they possibly need? Now, originally, this was going to be a $200 million program paid for. Now it's an unlimited authorization, granted subject to annual appropriations. But my experience around here is when you put authorizations in place and they're subject to appropriations, and particularly if there's no cap, there's no lid on how much could be spent for this particular program. That strikes me as probably not a really smart, wise use of taxpayer dollars, especially at a time when we're running $31 trillion deficit. This would be borrowed money. This would be deficit spending. It could be hundreds of millions of dollars, uncapped, without limit, basically to subsidize a very small share of the rail network in this country that has already received billions and billions and billions of dollars through previous legislation. So I move to strike that provision in the bill and ask for the committee to support it. I yield.